Topic for today, which I jumped into last night, kind of in the middle of things, on this topic, by the way, which is how to study Scripture well. And I was making basically this point, but not as organized as I'm saying today. We want to know what words in the Bible mean. We don't start with the tradition. We start with the Bible and then fold the tradition in. And something that we'll find is we may have read what a word means according to one view of the tradition, but I can almost guarantee you in the Jewish tradition, anything one teacher says a word means, there's going to be a davar acher. There's going to be a different opinion. And that's one of the beautiful things in our tradition, the multiplicity of meanings. The meanings of the Bible are polychromatic, not monochromatic. And therefore, sometimes when you study what a word means by the tradition, the person who's teaching it to you won't say, and by the way, this one disagrees with me. What a way to make a case. I don't think this would fit into Aristotle's rhetoric. If you want to convince somebody, tell them that half the people think you're wrong. That's probably not a good way to start, but that is actually quite Jewish to say, well, here's what the word seems to mean. Here's what one piece of the Midrash says, one piece of part of the law says, and here's what a different one. What we have to do is look at these differing opinions, understand why there's a range of opinions, and come down on one side or the other, but in a non-dogmatic way, as if I am the master of the meaning of the text. When you study Torah from a Jewish perspective, there is a kind of a humility. That's one point I was trying to make last night, but I want to back up and put this into context. When I studied Catholicism, I was very interested in the idea of an order, the Benedictine order, the Jesuit order, what it meant for people to join an order. And Franciscans, I actually met Franciscan monks. And I actually bought the rules, the Benedictine rules of order, for example. I was fascinated with the idea where people could say, well, yes, I'm Catholic, but there's a particular way to be a Catholic. Now, we really don't have that in Judaism where we have orders. Certainly we have Hasidic schools of thought. They're really not taught as a holy order, but you can be a Chabad Hasid. You can become a Bretzlover. Ger Hasidus is not easy to get into, although I think of myself as a Ger Hasid because my guiding light in the Hasidic world is the Sfat Emet, who's by the third Rabbi of Ger, a little town south of Warsaw, who wrote the text called the Sfat Emet, the language of truth. So that is my core place to go when I study Hasidus and the Hasidic understanding of Torah. When I look at all of this, I ask myself, what is the larger thing? What is the holy order that I might propose? And then I thought about 6 points of the holy order and then fill them in, and people could like it or not like it. So when I thought of my 6 points of the star of the holy order, where would I start? Someone says, I want to join the holy order of the united fellowship of the six-pointed star. Where would I start? I start with moral character. Moral character in the deepest way imaginable. First of all, there is a moral law. In philosophical science, this is called natural law, which means by our human nature, certain things are required of us and certain things are forbidden of us, especially morally. You actually can't do whatever you want. In fact, you should do things you might not want to do, and it's not your opinion. So when people say, but isn't all a matter of opinion? I say, people have any opinion that you want. I mean, we live in a free country. You can have any opinion you want, but not every opinion is right. They say, oh, how imperialistic. I say, I don't think it's imperialistic. I actually think some opinions are closer to the truth and others aren't. Now, I will start by saying I think murdering innocent people intentionally, unnecessarily, is wrong. Okay, so I'll make that as a kind of dogmatic statement of the moral law. Now, so moral character starts with the minimum of the moral law, but interestingly, when you start with moral character, necessarily it will involve words such as righteousness, justice, ethics, harm, and therefore all of these words must be studied. How do we study holy words? We have to study with the light of rationality and reasonability. which means we have to understand words in a rational way for ourselves and to be able to reason about these words with other people. So I think a core part of moral character is the ability to be rational and to be able to reason well, certainly take what one studies as a guide to action, sometimes social action, community action, but sometimes just virtue, managing your own moral character. So to be in the holy order of the six-pointed star, constant development on moral character, including rationality and reasoning, and all the other parts of moral character. I think from a Jewish perspective, one of the most important is Lashon Hara, using language to hurt people, using harsh language. And this would include, in my mind, criticizing people, speaking to them harshly, misleading people, defaming people, libeling people. That's a very big part of moral character in Judaism. A second part of this holy order would be inner life work. Now, I believe we human beings ought to seek meaning and purpose in our lives. This is Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. Logos comes from the great philosophic tradition of Stoicism. Remember, Stoicism, we think of Stoic being resilient. That's actually not the core teaching of the Stoics. The core teaching of the Stoics was logos, very similar to this idea of natural law. There's a rational principle of the universe which is somewhat equivalent to the mind of God. And so in the Stoic tradition, if you could align yourself with the purpose of the cosmos, you could find purpose in your life. Now, I don't think Frankl would identify himself as a philosophical Stoic. Maybe from a personality perspective, I think he had to be quite Stoic. Here, logotherapy is find meaning and purpose in your life. Now, a misunderstanding of Viktor Frankl would be any meaning or purpose. I don't think he would agree. I think that would be a very shallow, profoundly wrong misunderstanding of Viktor Frankl that any meaning is logos. Here we have to talk about meaning in the term of morality, but more here, spirituality. Let me give you an applied example. There's going to be a big conference at the end of this month in New York on Reform Judaism because they've noticed that some of their products of the Reform movement have become at the forefront of this atrocious attack on Israel. Irrational, unreasonable, hurtful, riling up people toward hate. How could a product of a Reform synagogue, of Reform camps, suddenly join the forces of darkness? How could that happen? Well, one thing from my perspective is they were educated so much in social justice that they took on the social justice movement de jour. Because if the meaning of life is social justice, then you have to look around for the latest cause. So I would not recommend to a person that the meaning of their life is the latest social justice cause, because the cause might be profoundly wrong and immoral. What comes before finding meaning in social justice? I would say being morally centered, being spiritually centered, being centered in rationality and reasoning, knowing how to assess ideas. So if I were to look for a logos, it would be centered in, you might say, my moral center, and from that, know how to conduct my inner life, my interpersonal life, and also my public life. So I think inner work, constant inner work of sorting out authenticity, your spiritual core, spiritual connection with other people, with the divine if you're so inclined, and from that proceed into all the other parts of your life. So I think a holy order requires constant spiritual work and knowing how to do spiritual work. A third part of a holy order, as I was indicating earlier, is the holy order, in my mind, has to have some body of sacred text. So people in the holy order have a common reference as they build a world of meaning. So what is a religion, for example? A religion is some kind of integration of symbols, rituals, sacred stories, how to study sacred stories, a theory of the human condition, a theory of the human capacity for transformation, what the end goals of our humanity is. So if a person says to me, it's all predetermined, life has no meaning, well, that's a different order, and I wouldn't call it a particularly holy one. There are many people who believe that. Life is meaningless, it's all predetermined. Now, in my worst moments, and don't repeat what I'm going to say now, okay? I say to myself, I don't think you're predetermined to say silly things, such as life has no meaning. That's a destructive, silly thing to say, that people have no free choice in how they think or how they behave. So when someone says, well, that's what I believe, I think to myself, I don't think you were predetermined to believe that. I think you chose to believe something that's actually kind of destructive. I go there rarely, but actually in my holy order, the one that I'm conceiving, I think with many others, we're not predetermined. We do have choice. We don't know how to account for it. That has to be an axiom. We don't know how to account for human free choice. We have to take it as an axiom. The person says we have no free choice, which means there is no morality, there is no meaning. We're just programmed. For me, that's a different order of thinking. So therefore, one of the core ideas of study for me is to study these holy ideas and come to some common worldview. So when you think of a holy order, it has to have these variety of things that I think are best expressed what we would call a religion. Another thing I think a holy order has to have, from my perspective, is its practices in space and time. Now, this is something that the Jewish tradition, I think, does very richly. The only other tradition that I know of that takes time as seriously is the Catholic tradition. If you look very deeply into Catholic holidays, they have a richness, a ritual kind of richness, a procedure of spiritual development that I think is similar to that of Judaism. Another thing Catholics have that Judaism doesn't have is cathedrals. So I didn't know this until I learned about it, that cathedrals are actually spiritual journeys. Every step you take in a cathedral is a different step in the spiritual journey. When you walk in, along the walls, what's on the altar, what's under the altar, what's down in the basement, these are all parts of a spiritual understanding of the world. Now, we Jews, for example, have cathedrals in time. As Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote in his book, The Sabbath, he avoided the word cathedral, although that's what he meant. He called it a palace in time, but he meant cathedral, meaning Shabbat is constructed in time as a journey, as a procession. If you look at the liturgy of Shabbat, each service after the next, the liturgy takes you on a journey from the candles of Friday night to the candles of Havdalah. So there's a journey through time on the Sabbath. There's a journey through time with our festivals throughout the year. So I think a holy order has to experience time in a certain way because we live in time. I think a holy order has to also live in space, which also includes the body. One thing that you'll see, of course, in our tradition is the mezuzah on the door. I'm not a mezuzah kisser. Some people, they touch the mezuzah, touch the lips. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I think it's much more important when you look at a mezuzah to internalize what the mezuzah is saying. I mean, it's actually the verses on the mezuzah. Mezuzah means the threshold, but we'll call that little vessel a mezuzah. What do you call the ceremony for putting up a mezuzah? It's called a Chanukat Bayit, like Hanukkah, dedicating the house. So when people say to me, hey, Rabbi Finley, can you officiate over hanging the mezuzah? I say, yes, but first we're going to call it by the right name, Chanukat Bayit. They say, like Hanukkah? I say exactly like Hanukkah. You're dedicating your house to what purpose? And I say, you need to tell me before we actually put the mezuzah on the door. I want you to say, we're dedicating this house to what? And people really reflect. What does my house stand for? It's space. It's my home. It's where I live. But is it dedicated to some purpose? One way to think about this is, for example, a coat of arms. Meaning if you have 4 quadrants, now you can change these every day. The 4 quadrants that govern this castle, this home, this house, what are the values that guide us? And we can switch them out. depending on the day, but they have something to do with civility, respect, love, encouragement. I think toleration for the weakness of others, their toleration for your weaknesses, the common endeavor to help each other grow. There's many things that you might say an ideal place where people live together, where it's in the traditional family or non-traditional family. There are certain, let's say, long-term relationships. There are certain values that should govern the home. So not only do we live in time, but we also live in space. Part of what living in what I'll call space is one's own body. I think holy orders, in my mind, should have eating disciplines. Now, our basic eating discipline, as you know, is kashrut. I'm vegan now, so I automatically keep kosher. But I remember at a very young age saying, well, I'm not going to mix milk and meat anymore. Now, why? Because I wanted to live in the holy order called Judaism, and everywhere I went, and I never ate another cheeseburger. Why? Because I'm in the holy order of the Jews. Now, then I had to figure out what it meant. So first I took on the rule of the order, and what I figured out it meant, it's what we shared with our children, is, well, if milk is a symbol of life, the milking mother mammal, and the meat is the dead animal, we don't mix the milking animal and the dead animal. Now, we can eat dead animals, and we can drink the milk of a milking mammal, but not together. Now, once I really convinced myself of that, actually, the idea of a cheeseburger actually is repugnant to me. I take it so deeply. Now, I'm not saying you can't be a good Jew and have cheeseburgers. It's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying to myself is, I realized at a young age that if I'm going to be a Jew, I have to join somehow in the eating order, as opposed to eating disorder. And for me, that included no eating treif, like the forbidden foods I don't eat. I didn't eat only kosher, but everywhere I went, whatever I did, certainly in America, I had to think about my minimal kashrut. Now, for some people, it's being vegetarian. For some people, it's only eating healthy in a healthy way. But I think a holy order has to have an eating discipline where the body participates in the holy order. And I would think healthy living in general. Another part of the body with the holy order, and again, I'm reading out from the Jewish tradition, is our talit, is tefillin. By the way, I put tefillin on religiously for 20 or more years. And we have a couple of yeshiva bachers who walk around my neighborhood having people put on tefillin. And every time they saw me, they say, hey, you're Rabbi Mordecai, you want to put on tefillin? I say, sure, yeah. And so I realized I just got started putting on my own tefillin. Like, I don't want to do it in my driveway. So I started putting on tefillin again. So if they said to me, did you lay tefillin today? I could say yes. Well, that's why I began putting on tefillin again. I've actually only begun the past 2 weeks. And I'm kind of liking it. So they text me, Rabbi Mordecai, you put on tefillin today? I said, yes, but come by anyway. So just to get them off my back, I'm putting on tefillin. And wow, I did it for 20 or more years, and it's really, really been beautiful. Now, I might stop again. Talit is something I'm more serious about. I think probably at least several days a week when I do my morning study, I put on my talit. Some days I do, some days I don't, but it's always out. It's always ready. And the last element, if this counts up to 6, is what I'm going to call community. Hence our online Friday, our online Shabbos, my various Zoom classes, our gathering on the holidays. I think to be in the holy order, you have to be able to interface with other people in the holy order. Now, part of what it means for us to come together as a group, and they have the benefit of our teachers, is ultimately to create small group studies. But the small group study, in my mind, has to be conducted under the guide of the holy order. So I'll say a few words about that. Community doesn't mean people coming together and saying anything they want, whatever their opinion is. And that, when I first began teaching Chavarot, and I taught a Torah study Chavarah. I'm fluent in Hebrew, and my Aramaic's good, and someone would give an interpretation of the Bible. I would say, well, that's actually not correct. They say, well, the Bible is what I think it is. That's my opinion. No opinion is better than another. And I thought, well, if I'm going to continue with this group, they have to know that the Bible doesn't mean anything you want. You have to do the Peshat, the philological, syntactic, semantic, and then add your meaning. But your meaning ought to line up with some basics of what the words mean biblically. And then you can build your own opinion, quote the Midrash, quote the Talmud, quote Rashi, but you got to start with the basics. There's a lot of resistance. I mean, many people did not like it and stopped coming. But I said, if you want me to be your teacher, we got to do it this way, because if a person says, in my opinion, it means this, in front of someone who actually has mastered those other things, I said, I'll have to respond, because I don't want anybody walking out of here thinking that that's what the Bible says, when it clearly doesn't say that. And some of the opinions were just completely unjustified, and people sometimes think that if I think it, it's automatically justified, which is not true. So, for example, in the holy order that I'm imagining, if people come together to study, there's a requirement that there are what I call, and I don't mean to sound elitist and arrogant, they are called authorized interpreters. How do you become an authorized interpreter? Well, you have to study. And you might actually have to get the imprimatur of some more highly authorized interpreter that says you're authorized to lead a study group because you know the values of the holy order. You have the basic interpretive skills, the basic linguistic skills. And if someone says something that you know is not right, that you can correct them. If I can just give you a brief example from my early rabbinate, I said this story many times. When I was a junior rabbi at Stephen Weiss Temple, I was number 6, which means the phone calls that the operator did not know to whom to give went my way. So I pick up my phone the day before Rosh Hashanah, and the woman said to me, "Are we allowed to go out clubbing to bars after the Rosh Hashanah Eve service?" I said, "I don't know law against it, but I have no idea why you're asking me this question." She said, "Well, you know, it's New Year." Ah, it's New Year's Eve. Got it. It's Jewish New Year's Eve, and you want to know if after Rosh Hashanah services, we're supposed to go out and get drunk. I said, I got to take a breath here. I didn't see that coming. I said, "No, that's actually not what you do on Rosh Hashanah." And the person tried to make a case. "Well, why not? What if that's what I want to do?" I said, "Look, you can do it, but it's not Rosh Hashanah. If you go to a Rosh Hashanah service, you don't automatically go out and drink. What you kind of automatically do is go home and contemplate and engage in self-reproof and what you want your life to mean." And the person said, "Well, do I have to do that?" I said, "Kinda." I'm starting to say it. I don't want to sound too bossy. But if you want to observe Rosh Hashanah, that's kind of what you have to do. Now, why do I get to say that? Because I am, quote unquote, an authorized interpreter. How did I get this? Well, I have a smicha certificate, but there are many other ways to be an authorized interpreter. But mainly it's you might say, there is a hierarchy of knowledge and learning. So we should have community, gatherings of the Holy Order. Now, people in the Holy Order say, "Okay, we're done with the Holy Order meeting. Now let's go out and party." That's fine with me. But in the Holy Order meeting is conducted in a certain way. And I think the best example of a lay-run Holy Order is 12-step programs. I've been to many 12-step meetings. I worked at a drug and rehab center where one of the requirements was 12-step meetings. And 12-step meetings have a pretty strict culture.
Hi.
Yes.
Miss Howard. Do you feel better?
Somebody's mic is on. It's actually my last sentence. 12-step is a great example where there is an acculturation and a socialization of what happens at a 12-step meeting. It's pretty much enforced by the lay people. Once the meeting is done, I understand the culture is coffee, hanging out, and pretty much staying in 12-step culture. What you do next is up to you. But when you're in a 12-step meeting and you're in the aftermath of the 12-step meeting, the culture is intact. So I hope I've counted up to 6. If not, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 7. But you have a general sense of what I mean, that if one wants to live a life of holiness, there has to be a strategy. I came up with 6 different points, and I'm just recommending them to you for your consideration. I'll listen to my recording. I'll see if I hit 6. And if I like it enough, I might devote one Shabbos to each one of these 6 points of the Holy Order of whatever it is that I call it, the Holy Order of the 6-pointed star. Try to imagine that the parents identify themselves in a formal way or not as being a part of a holy order, very informally, without discussing it, that we believe that life has meaning. We're not dogmatic about God, but that life has meaning. There is right and wrong. Reasoning and rationality are part of it. And to be a human being, you actually have duties as well as rights. And there's an engagement with sacred text. And that's the family culture. Now, in my mind, when the child hits college, they're looking for other people who share that culture. Do we believe that life has meaning? Do we live by an honor code as well as being interested in rights? Is life more than fighting for social justice? Yes, but subject to the light of rationality and reasoning. And therefore, when someone comes and says, Gaza free from the river to the sea, which means massacre every Israeli, someone says, actually, not so much. That's not a good thing. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? I don't know until I rationally look at the evidence. But notice, they don't want to rationally look at the evidence because they want drama, because they want community, because they want meaning. And their people are willing to sacrifice all their integrity, their entire moral code, all rationality, all reasonableness in order to join the drama. I think that's the main thing that's happening. Therefore, what should Jewish education entail? More than social justice. The core of it should be spirituality, a moral code, rationality, reasoning, and then go fight for justice as long as you can define what justice is. Okay. That's what I would say. Before you come to my demonstration, you got to fill out a form. What's your spiritual search? What's your moral code? Do you know how to reason? You know how to be rational? And you have a theory of justice. Fill all that out. Go join the demonstration. Now, I've never been to a demonstration in my life. Okay? And that's one reason. Because when I look at demonstrations with the signs and slogans and placards, I go, I don't know if I believe that. So I couldn't go to any demonstrations. Partly because I just doubt the truth value of signs and slogans. Oh, can I tell you one other little Finley witticism? I never went to camp. People said to me, "Did you ever go to camp?" I said, "I went to boot camp, and that was actually pretty good. You know, I learned a lot there. I learned about integrity and honor and stoicism and resilience. I shoot a rifle like an archery range, except with an M14. So, you know, and I, you know, the further I get away from my military background, it was really a great experience for everything that I teach, especially honor, dignity, loyalty, stoicism, and as we were taught, first day of boot camp is, we're hated. Our country doesn't like us. But when they need us, we have to be ready. And that was it. We're hated. We're not liked. But they're going to need us one day. And we don't care if they hate us, don't like us, but we got to be ready when they do need us. And now we're going to learn how to be Marines. So what was that for me? That was a path of meaning. We stand for something. We're not liked. We do it anyway. Anyway, my little fugue into my thinking about my past. If you look at gang culture anywhere, Hell's Angels all the way over to the Crips and the Bloods, people looking for community and crime and risk and being predators actually creates a kind of a sense of community of especially lost young men. It's exactly right. So that's why people who go to church every week are not likely to join the Crips, the Bloods, or the Hells Angels because they already have a community. And from what they learned in their community, that doesn't look so good. So you're getting from me that I actually think a religion well practiced with all the dimensions I spoke about is probably the greatest immunity to any kind of personal or social morbidity. And last comment on the board. The pilgrimage, yes. I'm not sure what happened in the Holy Temple, whether the Holy Temple was like a cathedral where you walked in and went on a holy journey. We're not sure. We know that the architecture of the Mishkan and the Holy Temple is a spiritual journey, but the local Beit Knesset was probably not a cathedral. Therefore, I'm going to say, what do Jews need to do? And anybody who doesn't have a cathedral, you have to build a cathedral within. And building the cathedral within is part of what I mean by having a holy order. So the holy order doesn't meet in the cathedral. The holy order is people have the cathedral within and then share that cathedral, you might say, as they go through life. The sad thing about Catholicism for all its depth and beauty and transcendence. Someone told me that the largest denomination in Los Angeles is non-practicing Catholics because they're not finding meaning in the Catholic Church. And it's very distressing because you look at the beautiful architecture, but the rooms are relatively empty. So that's a great metaphor. Building a cathedral on the outside doesn't build a cathedral on the inside. And thank you for that, for having put a fine point on this. Part of what a holy order, such as the Holy Order of the Six-Pointed Star, is we all build a cathedral within, enough that we have a commonality that we can talk about, and we know what it means to be in that world. Anyway, thank you for your interest in my idea. I think it's a productive idea, and I might stay with it for a few weeks. I'm ending my talk here.